Recording. Welcome to this live session. I'm going to get into some course content soon, but first we have a few updates. And as always, if there's any questions, please let me know in the comments section, and you can also let me know in the discussion board for live sessions afterwards. So you'll notice if you look at the calendar tab that this is the last live session of its format in a while. Now, I think since I took this screenshot, the calendar's been updated, so there might be one more thing on here, but it might be out of the view of this calendar anyways. Next week, all of the checklists are due. So all of the checklists are due Monday, which means that it's really important that you guys make sure that you guys have updated all of those checklists as soon as possible. So that's checklists 1 through 5 that are due. And it looks like I need to update the due time. They're all due at the same time at the end of the day. I need to update the due time for just the one there. Because those are due and because the midterm self-evaluation is due as well, I wasn't planning a content-based live discussion. The groups who are doing a group presentation had requested a live session on the 15th. If you're not doing a group presentation, you by no means have to listen to that. You don't have to attend that. That's just there for those people. It would be really nice in terms of trying to get all the group presentations organized if we can try and have one person from each group attend that, just because most of the group sessions aren't actually scheduled yet. When those group sessions do get scheduled, the calendars may change a little bit. So from here on out, please check on the calendar just in case there's any changes to the timing of some of those. I will try as much as possible to schedule those group sessions during an already scheduled time, but the scheduling of group sessions is driven primarily by the availability of the group members because it's important that they be able to attend. Depending on the number of sessions that there are, of course, I'm not expecting that you attend more than one live session in a week, so you may want to choose the one that best fits your schedule if there's more than one. Actually, the week that the one group session is scheduled is the same week that the, thesis paper, term paper is due, and so there was an optional Q&A session that you can attend. There will be the group presentation, and afterwards I will answer some more Q&A stuff, but there's no actual expected content in terms of the delivery because I'm trying to give you guys more time to focus on the paper that week. And then after your break, there's 2 weeks in which we have guests. So the Dr. Raymond session is a wonderful session. If you can attend, I think it's really awesome that she's doing it in the evening for us. It would be wonderful. She's a naturopath, and she can talk about naturopathic medicine, and she relates it very well to culture and stuff like that. That's a really informative session. And then the week after that, it's during the day. That one's based on the availability of the guest speaker. Steve, the guy who I taught the course with last term, is going to come and going to talk sort of in general about the course and cultural competence and things like that. But like I said, keep an eye on the calendar as those group presentations get added. Remember that it is important to submit your checklists. If they're not submitted on time, of course, they're not going to be considered done, and they all count towards your mark. So checklist 1 to 5. And after you do the checklists, the reason why I have them on 2 different dates is then you are going to download and complete the participation rubric. If I click on this link here, it brings up the rubric. So you'll remember we talked about this rubric in the first week or so, and then we talked about it again and we updated it. The instructions are here. There's video instructions about how to download it, but basically you go to File, Download As, probably a Microsoft Word document or a rich text format you'll download, and then you're going to edit the downloaded version of the document. Several people last semester wanted to try and edit this version of the document, but then everybody would see your edits, so that isn't going to work. I'm not going to allow you access to edit this document. I will email you and tell you that you need to download it. Just Do your best to evaluate your participation in the course thus far. Now, if you got married or if someone passed away in the family or something like that, and there was a week that you couldn't participate the same as you did other weeks, please give yourself some leniency for that. Of course, I would if I was marking you. And judge your overall participation in the course. If you had an off week, that doesn't mean that you need to deduct yourself for the entire time. Read what's in the different levels here. You can make your comments in terms of why you gave yourself the mark that you did underneath the add comments here section, or if you find that you need more room, as long as you clearly lay it out, you can put it down at the bottom as well. That's fine. In particular, please, if you're deducting yourself marks, tell me why you're deducting yourself marks. That'll help me make sure that you're deducting an appropriate level of marks. I found that last semester people were quite hard on themselves sometimes, and I sometimes would bump marks up. But if I have no idea why you gave yourself the mark that you gave yourself, I'm not going to be able to adjust that mark for you. I will be able to take a look at your actual participation in the course. As you see, it says to aid in your review of discussion board postings, do a search for your name. I can do the same thing. I can search for your name and I can review all the postings that you've done. So I can see that kind of thing. There were some instances last term where people said that they were regularly participating, and when I searched for their name, I only found like 3 postings, and I was like, that does not seem to add up, in which case I adjusted that mark down instead of up. So just keep that in mind when you're doing your reflection. I can also search and see what you've been up to. You guys still hear me? Yeah? Okay, good. Good stuff. Are there any questions about this participation rubric? All right, let me know what the questions are if there's questions. Sorry. Alrighty. Oh, do you have to, what? You have to do an appendix with proof of things? No, you don't need to do an appendix. A lot of it is based on your reflection. So like if there's a reason for something, I'm not, unless it's something that I really think I need proof for, then I can email you. That's okay. Then I can email you if there's something I need clarification on. But for the most part, you don't need to like attach proof of, like if you had like a doctor's appointment or something like that. I don't need anything like that. Proof of your participation in the course doesn't make sense either, because I can search Blackboard very easily to see the number of postings that you've done. There's also tracking in Blackboard. I can see the amount of hours that you spent in the course if I want to. Now, typically I don't go into that for every student. I go into that in the situations where a student is like, oh, I've been participating all the time, and I'm like, I don't even know your name. So then I try and look and see what the actual participation was. So it's basically a very brief, concise rationale for the mark that you gave yourself. No problem. How can you search for your name? Okay. So I am just going to open the discussion board. And let's see, let's go into the thesis board, for example. You go search, and then I'll go, I mean, you can put your whole name in there if you want. You can select a date range, and then you press go, and then it'll come up with all the posts that you've done in that board, which in this particular board is a lot. A lot of the times I sort of watch the discussions, but for the thesis activity in particular, I wanted to be more active because, well, I'm going to be marking those essays later. No problem. And there's instructions in that participation rubric if you forget. Okay. So module 6, just as we got used to things, I'm going to do something a little bit different. Module 6 is set up a little bit differently. So in the discussion board for module 6, you will notice that I've asked you to try and help your peers prepare for the midterm. That midterm link is to the midterm review document that I posted near the end. near the beginning of the course. There we go. That's what the document looks like. Very little updates were made. I added a couple more page numbers since it's been posted, but that's it. This is to try and help guide your studying for the midterm. So if you use this document for next week, I'm asking you to, it's very general, just post something to help your peers prepare for the midterm. Now, I think sometimes you guys think that I want you to do a lot more work than what I actually want you to do. You could pick a term and you could make a GIF related to a term. You could do a little like crossword puzzle. You could do anything that you want to help people prepare for the midterm. The difference here is that instead of posting in your groups, I want you to post it under the module that it's for. So you can look at that midterm document, you could pick a term off there, and then instead of replying to your group post, you would reply to module 1 if it's for module 1. I'm not expecting you to keep revisiting this and commenting on everything. You can comment on things should you so choose to, but I'm hoping that this will create some study notes that are organized by modules for people to review, so that this week's activity is actually everybody studying together for the midterm. Okay, Samantha, could you also do a write-up about it instead of an artifact? Yeah, so if you're not doing a portfolio, you don't really care about doing like a GIF or something, you can just put a summary of, you know, what the word means, and I don't know, maybe add something about how it was useful in your practice or something. Or last term, what some people did, particularly because not everybody had the textbook, is some people summarized some of the terms from the textbook and posted that for their students. Some people went nuts and posted all their study notes in there, and that's fine too. Just something, anything to help your peers study. Yeah, and it's really flexible. It's really up to you what you want to put in there. I'm not going to judge you if it's a short post. And like I said, I'm not expecting you to go back and then comment on 2 other people necessarily for this week. You can if you want to, but you don't have to. And probably some people will do it anyways because it's habit, or because they didn't watch this live session before the posting came up, in which case, sorry about that. But yeah, so the expectations this week are a little bit different. And then after that, we will go back to the groups, because the groups, I think the groups are working pretty good. When I start the threads, I think that's working a little bit better than it was before. Anyways, the discussion boards seem a little bit more organized, and you can choose whether or not you want to subscribe to your threads. Okay. So speaking of the midterm is, like the final exam, going to focus on definitions, examples, and applications. That review document that I brought up for you will be a good tool to help focus your studying. Joanne, I lose track of time, but yeah, I think Module 6 starts next week, like Monday. I opened it early because someone was going away on their honeymoon. Yeah, so if you wanted to post all the study notes that you did, just post it under the Module 6 activity, and that can count for your Module 6 activity. You don't have to do anything new. And it's okay if people post different versions of similar sorts of study notes. That's perfectly fine. Just try and put it under the module that it goes for. Okay, so that review document should help to guide your studying. And Erin, just if you wanted to start a new thread saying everything instead of, if it doesn't go with the module, if it's everything in the one document, you could do that too. But as much as possible, I'd like to try and keep things under their module titles. Everything that's worth marks is under the assignments tab in Blackboard. So you will find the midterm as well under the assignments tab in Blackboard. At the time that I posted this PowerPoint, I wasn't sure what was happening with lockdown, but I gave them the deadline of today and said, if you want me to use lockdown, it needs to be installed before the live session tonight, and it was. So we will be using Lockdown Browser. There's instructions in a new tab about Lockdown Browser. There's a practice test under that tab that you guys can explore. I do highly recommend that you try and do that exploration piece before the actual week of the midterm, which is why I actually put that into your checklist. So if you go to the Lockdown Browser link, There's information about Lockdown Browser here. Now, keep in mind, I am just using Lockdown Browser. I am not using the webcam. I am not using the monitor stuff. So you don't have to worry about webcam checks prior to starting the test. So there's some videos. Where's the test? Here's the test. The practice test right here says practice test requires Respondus Lockdown Browser. You will notice that under assignments, where your midterm is, I don't know if you can actually see this link or not, but when you do see the link, it will say midterm test, winter 2018, requires Respondus Lockdown Browser. So same thing, it requires the browser. Since we are using the browser, you have more time to do the test than I would have given you if you weren't using the browser. So you can kind of see that, I guess, as a good thing about that. I'm going to see what the comment here. Okay, so the purpose of Lockdown Browser is to reinforce the idea that you should not be searching Google at the same time as you're writing a test. I'm not saying that people are doing that. I am saying that it's possible that people could do that, and we want to try and make online testing more like proctored testing. It should work on older computers. Christopher, if you have a chance, please test it as soon as you can. If you have any difficulties, let me know. You'll probably have to talk to the tech people, but please let me know if it doesn't work. Yes, please email me. So, Larissa, my understanding is that the issues in the other classes were that some sections were using it and other sections weren't using it, and people were using the actual webcam piece, and I'm not using the webcam piece. So the people who canceled it are teaching in different circumstances than I am. Wenda really wanted me to give it a try, so I am. And it was in the syllabus from the beginning, and I'm the only teacher this term teaching the course, so it's not like it's not fair because some teachers are using it and other teachers aren't using it because there's only one teacher. Joanne, if you don't see it yet, it's probably because the link will become available during the week of the test. Yes, so Christopher, I think it explains exactly what you're putting on your computer. It's just like a browser. It's just like Chrome. There's some basics, a quick start guide. I believe it gives you more information. I'm one of those people that installs a lot of things on my computer without reading the fine print, but I believe there is fine print there that you can look at. Why not give you the option to go to test centers? Well, you will be going to test centers for the final exam. I didn't have that built into my course for the midterm. I think what Kelly's asking for is an option. So this is what we're using for the midterm. The reason why we're using it for the midterm is because it's in my syllabus. And if it wasn't in my syllabus at this point in the semester, it would not be something that I would be adding. But it was in the syllabus. It's something that we talked about the first and second week of class. It's something that I told you was coming, but if the tech people didn't get stuff together in time for you guys to practice, then I would say that then I would cancel it. I gave them a deadline of today and they got it installed yesterday. So I'm going to run it. It's a 5% midterm. So it's low stakes in terms of some of the other classes and how much their things were worth. And I'm hoping that you guys can give it a try with me. I am not using the webcam, which I think will make things go a little bit smoother than if I was. No. So Kelly, we have the options to set up what it asks you for. I'm not going to be asking you for all kinds of ID and stuff when you start the test. You're welcome, Christopher. I don't see the same things that you guys see. I'm going to play with this a little bit more. I did play with it a little bit, but I'm going to play with it a little bit more. Let me know if you guys run into any issues with the practice test, please. Okay, yeah. So I think there's a lot of reasons why people may have questions about Lockdown Browser and why we're using this and things like that. there's a lot of different perspectives about where we could come from. I think it would be better if it was something that's been trialed, but unfortunately everything's new at one point in time, right? And so this being a sort of learning experience for us, the midterm's only worth 5%, is not as high stakes as if it was worth more. It's also not as high stakes as if I was using the webcam. So we are not requiring you to buy webcams for this. All we're requiring you to do is download a browser. That browser locks you out of using other things like Skype, like Google, like that kind of thing during the time of the test. I have it set up so that if you decide to leave the test, you can't go back in and restart the test. Once you leave the test, you're done the test. And it's to try and have an online equivalent of a more controlled testing environment. Shut down everything else in the house. I think it's just the stuff on your computer. Yeah, so I think that there's some misinformation about everything that Lockdown Browser can do. So the browser in and of itself without the webcam is just a browser. And that's all that I'm using. So it can keep you out of using other programs on your computer. I believe it blocks you from taking screenshots and things like that. It's just to try and keep the testing environment more secure. Okay. That's good to know. And you know what? I think that if there are people that do have concerns around this, we can maybe pick that up after we've gotten through the content, because I'm trying to keep these live sessions like time manageable for people. So that would be a good time to continue that. So it says 60 minutes here. Sorry about that. I changed it to 90 minutes after the lockdown got added. So you will have more time than 60 minutes, and there are 30 questions. We are also talking about on the yes, it's testable for the midterm, and we are doing the paper soon about a thesis. So that's what was happening last week. A lot of people had issues with theses that weren't concise. I will revisit Lockdown Browser after we get through this stuff. Sorry about that. So if we look at this one, for example, police are jeopardizing the nurse-client relationship and interfering with the nurse's legal obligations when respecting patient rights. That's a little bit long if we want to try and say that 4 or 5 different times in the paper. So another way to say that would be police are jeopardizing the nurse-client relationship. And then that other information, yes, valuable, can be included in the background or other sections of the paper. Another example, Ontario's pilot project to eliminate the pre-existing 6-month sober criteria for liver transplants will cause more harm than good. The end of that's a little bit vague. It is a little bit long. So there is a more concise way to say that. Sorry, I should have had a capital letter at the beginning of that sentence. It is immoral to eliminate the waiting period for alcoholics requiring a liver transplant. The word immoral there is very strong, gives a very clear stance in terms of where you are, and it's a little bit shorter than the other statement. And then this one, I'm not sure if I've actually captured what the person was trying to say, but although society can provide support to infertile women, involuntary childness creates emotional and social distress in women that society does not fully understand how to navigate. That's very long again, just like the other ones, to try and say several times throughout the paper. So society fails infertile women gets at the same idea. The word fail is very strong, so it kind of captures the same thing that you could then fight throughout your paper. Okay, you guys are still talking about Lockdown Browser. I will come back to Lockdown Browser after we get through some content here. All right, so if you're looking at your thesis and you notice that your thesis is a little bit long, sorry, I will unplug my fridge again. Try and make it as few words as possible. 5 words would be really awesome because you have to say that thesis several times. Now, I understand that a lot of thesis statements won't be able to get down to 5 words, but do your best to try and make it as short as possible. And I know that can be hard when you're really passionate, but all that wonderful passionate stuff that you want to put in there can be put in other parts of your paper. Okay. So if you are having any difficulty with your thesis statement, it is really important that you reach out to me. You can call me if you want. You can email me if you want. However you want to get in touch with me, I will help you. I might not give you the answer right away. I might say, oh, that's too long. Or I might say, I'm not exactly sure that's debatable. Those are the two main issues I find that people in this class are having. Either your thesis statement is too long, or sometimes I'm not sure that it's debatable. And sometimes it is. You just have to explain what is debatable about it. Yeah. Yeah, bug me as much as you want. Now, I probably will mostly answer you in the evenings, though. Yeah, it makes sense, right? Because you have to state your thesis throughout the paper. And sorry, for the people watching the recording, one of our peers here is saying that they thought a short thesis was not good enough, but it makes sense because when you're arguing the reason why throughout the paper, you have to restate it several times. Yeah, and you know what? I don't know where that came from, but oh, oh my gosh. I'm glad we cleared that up. Just a second. Oh. Okay, so the shorter, the better. And that thesis statement should be at the very end of your second paragraph, because you're going to have a paragraph where you articulate the issue based on a media article, and then you're going to have the paragraph where you explain the background information. At the end, you're going to have your thesis statement, and then after that, you're going to prove your thesis with 3 different arguments, one for each paragraph that's well explained. And there was a whole other session about that, so I won't go into too much detail. You can revisit that if you want more information. Are there any questions about any of that before we get into content for Module 4 and 5? All right. Okay. No, the APA session was I think the APA session was different. I think the APA session was just APA. I might have to get back to you on which session that was that we went into detail on that. It might have been like the second or third. Post a message and I'll figure out which session it was, because I can't remember off the top of my head. Okay, so we're going to go through some key terms tonight. Now, I'm not going to go over all the key terms, so there are more terms that you want to review before the midterm in particular, and in particular between now and the final. When we talk about culture, care, validation, and preservation, that is something that is discussed in the textbook and as well in the College of Nurses of Ontario's document, I believe. Sorry, I didn't put that underneath here. But that is all about trying to preserve the patient or the client's culture by integrating it into the plan of care. It involves acknowledging, and we talked in a previous live session about the idea that just because you are accepting of someone's cultural practices does not mean necessarily that you endorse them. So there is a difference there, and I believe that was the College of Nurses of Ontario's document where that came from. So this really involves working with the client and getting their preferences into the plan of care. So usually this type of thing is used, this approach, culture, care, validation, and preservation, is used when whatever it is that the client is engaging in does not pose a risk of harm to either themselves or others. So if you're thinking like in a long-term care setting, it would not pose a risk of harm to their roommate, for example. Okay. I was going to ask if you guys can think of some examples, but I think this one's a little bit easier, so we'll save those example things for later. Now, culture, care, accommodation, and negotiation is slightly different. And when you look at the different definitions between these, the difference that I see is the change that's involved. So in order to accommodate a client, it requires that we as healthcare providers do things a little bit differently, perhaps, than what we're used to. So as opposed to just saying, oh yeah, it's okay, go ahead and keep doing what you're doing, it actually involves an adaptation on our side. to allow the client to keep doing whatever it is that they were doing before. So there are some examples in the book. The book talks about the use of interpreters. You know, interpreters aren't something that we use on a daily basis, for example, or if you're allowing family members to do parts of care that they probably wouldn't normally be involved in. Can you guys think of any other examples? Feel like there's crickets. Okay, smudging. Yep. So they might need to notify different departments, and they might need to, I don't know, maybe make space or something like that. So it would require a change in how things are normally done. Disability accommodations. Yep. That's a little bit different though, because that's more for disability than for culture, but it's the same idea. Honey in mat. I'm not sure what you're talking about. So, Jake, I think that's more culture care preservation, because I think accommodation involves doing something differently. Allowing a family to stay with a loved one when perhaps it's against policy, for example. I guess, yeah, you could see that way. Allowing them to bring food in. I don't know if that, it depends. If it involves a change in the way that we do things, then yes, I would say that fits with that. Otherwise, I would say that's probably more of incorporating in their plan of care, which would be the one before that, the preservation piece. Creating a, oh, I'm not going to say this right, snozzling room for patients with dementia. I don't know if I'm saying that right, and I'm not exactly sure what that is. I have to be honest, so I'm not sure. Oh, some cultures give honey to the newborn baby to make their words sweet. Okay. Yeah, that's not something, if that's not something that's normally done, which it isn't, then yeah, that would be an accommodation. If it's the nurse that's actually getting the honey and providing that. Cultural practices at the end of life, yeah. Or something like, I'm thinking, like if a client is in a long-term care setting, for example, is engaging in Ramadan, I think I'm saying that properly, and you know, when they're not eating from sun up to sundown. Well, if you don't normally provide meals for clients after sundown, but you make arrangements for this client to provide meals for them after sundown during that time, that would be an accommodation. Because it involves us as the healthcare team doing something different than what we would normally do. Okay. So culture care reframing and repatterning is an interesting one. Yeah. Okay. Good point. Sorry, if you're watching the recording, someone's just saying the honey thing is definitely accommodation since they don't want a baby to have honey before 6 months. Good point. So the College of Nurses of Ontario talks about culture care repatterning, and this isn't where you're trying to change the client's beliefs or change their values. You're respecting them, but you're helping them think within their own values and beliefs about new possibilities, things they may not have considered before. So oftentimes that involves some critical thinking on your part, asking some good questions, and then trying to help the client figure out how they might be able to accomplish something without validating beliefs or standards in their practice. So I'm not exactly sure how good of an example this is, but I was recently watching an episode of Grey's Anatomy. The latest episode is called, I looked up the name of it later, called Personal Jesus. I don't know if anybody out here, does anybody watch Grey's Anatomy, or am I alone? Got a couple of Grey's Anatomy people. All right, there's this girl, her name's April, and she's got a reputation in the show of being quite religious. And so there's this guy that comes into the emergency department, and he tried to cut his hand off. Now, it's a little dramatic because it's a TV show. But anyways, he's saying that he tried to cut his hand off because he couldn't stop masturbating. And the Bible says, I forget exactly what he said, but basically if your hand sins, then you should cut it off. So her, being very religious, was able to have a discussion with him near the end of the show using different parts of Scripture, trying to talk about the idea that there are other ways to look at that. Now, it's not the best example, but it is an example at an attempt. In that show, April was a little bit stressed and probably not being the most therapeutic, but that is an example of how someone could be using Scripture to talk to a client about maybe different parts of Scripture that they hadn't considered in terms of the idea that we probably shouldn't be cutting our own hands off. Stuff like that actually happens. Well, I'm just saying in a show it's just done a little bit dramatically because it's a TV show. An uh-oh screen? No. Yes, that's right. She helped change the way that he viewed the Bible, and she was able to do that through her knowledge. Now, we wouldn't be able to do that if we don't have the same knowledge of the Bible, but the other doctors were talking to him about, pleasure centers in the brain and that kind of thing. And they called April in to talk to him because they knew that she had the knowledge to do that. So, sometimes it involves working with the team and talking to the people that you think would have that knowledge. Mm-hmm. So if you're not a Grey's Anatomy watcher, this may or may not hit home with you. You can decide to watch the show if you want or not. That actual episode, season 14, episode 10, has a lot of interesting things around it in terms of culture and stuff. Oh, you read that repatterning is heavily reliant on family support or any support system because repatterning is less likely to stick if they don't all make an effort to repattern together. That's a very good point, Chelsea. I don't know where you read that, but that makes a lot of sense. And it is one of those harder things, I think, to do with clients because it's asking for a change in their thinking. And so if you're talking with a client about anything and they're like, oh yeah, whatever, during the conversation, it's not going to stick as much as if they actually buy in. So it's a high level skill, I would say, but something that nurses can use with clients. Purnell's model, there's a lot of different models that you'll need to know a little bit more for the final, but in terms of the midterm, one of the first ones that we look at is Purnell, and that's because people are using it in various parts. Of course, those of you who are doing a group project will be using it. And Purnell looks at the meta paradigm concepts and also levels of competence. So us in this course may be more conscious than people who are not in a course like this, but basically talking about the idea that you can be competent or incompetent, and you can be either aware of your competence or incompetence or not aware of your competence or incompetence. So being able to identify what level people are at in a scenario is a good skill to have. Okay. We also talk in module 5 about encoding and decoding. That's basically the idea that when someone is trying to communicate a message like I'm trying to do right now a little bit late at night, you're trying to put information into a form that other people can receive. So you're putting information into a message. And then on the other side, you guys listening to this are trying to decode the messages. You're trying to interpret those messages. And particularly when you're dealing with people from different cultures or maybe who speak different languages, there's a lot of places in that encoding and decoding process where things can sort of get jumbled and there can be some miscommunication. Now, sorry, this doesn't flow very well, but I got a question for you guys. How do you introduce yourself when you walk up to a new client? Using nod. Can you, that sounds good. Can you tell me what nod is? Is it name, something, designation? As a member of a team, okay. First name and position. Ooh, interesting that you say first name. Why first name, Erin? Identify your name, occupation, and what you're going to do. Yes, that's good. why you're in the room is a good idea too. I'm curious about this thing. Why you find it more personal? Okay, what do you guys think? Do you think it's good to use a first name, a last name? A lot of people are saying first name. A lot of people use their first name. Okay. Hi, Mr. or Mrs. whoever. I'm going to be your nurse. People never use their last name. It's personal preference. Oh, thank you, Nicholas. Somebody, okay, so we're going to start a discussion here. Nicholas says he thinks, oh, sorry, I read that wrong. Okay, you think it's appropriate to use a first name. I thought you said inappropriate. I thought somebody had a different opinion. First name, a lot of people use first names. Okay, oh, here we go. So, Mary Kate, thank you, not Nicholas. Thank you, Mary Kate. Mary Kate was brought up to use a last name. Lacey thinks it's best to ask. And then someone says they think that you should use the one that you want to be called with. Someone else is saying they're younger than a lot of their patients. Okay, Christopher, if you work in a jail, I understand why you're going to use your first name. But let's say we don't work in a jail for now. Okay? First name because of social media. Okay, Becky, but people are supposed to know who you are if they want to like talk to your manager about you or whatever. They're entitled to have your last name. You like your first name because you want to remove bias. I'm not really sure how that works. Okay, so there are some cultures who might be offended by the use of a first name or who might find it not as appropriate to just use a first name. Okay, so depending on where you work, you may or may not have organizational policies. And so what I'm about to say is probably, you know, in terms of cultural competence, would it be best to use your first name or your last name or both? Right. Okay, so I think there's a lot of different ways to look at this. There's a lot of different perspectives. And if you work, yes, both with your title, very good. If you work in an area where there's other reasons for not wanting to disclose your name, I understand that. But in terms of cultural competence, right, Lacey, first name might mean that you're being too friendly. Different cultures are going to interpret that differently. So the best approach is to provide your first and last name, and then you're giving the client the choice of how to address you. And I think the idea of giving the client that choice is a more culturally competent way to go. Yeah, so depending on, right, depending on where you work, there may be different reasons for doing things, but in terms of this course, you know, if you were in a testing situation or something and you had to choose how to introduce yourself, the most culturally competent option, given no other information, would be to provide the client with your first and last name so that they could make the choice, because some cultures might see it offensive or too personal to just use a first name, and some cultures might find it offensive to just use a last name. So if you use both, you're kind of more balanced. Okay, yeah. And maybe there's some other reasons. Okay, another thing that you want to make sure is that you're polite. I'm sure most of you are polite anyways, and that you keep in mind that the way that you are delivering your messages could be interpreted in different ways, that whole encoding and decoding thing. And when you're introducing yourself to people, when you're engaging with people, also be cautious of the use of touch and eye contact. We are going to get more into touch and eye contact throughout later in the course. Yes, and nonverbal communication plays a really big role. Okay, so now let's say you're talking to a client who speaks another language. How do you communicate with that client? There are a lot of different strategies. Translation apps? Okay, I'm not familiar with fabulous translation apps. Maybe you could post something about that. Okay, you may or may not be able to get a family to interpret. I'm going to put a pin in that, Samantha. Nonverbal communication is a good strategy. Yes, the College of Nurses actually talks about the use of nonverbal communication. Speaking slowly and clearly, yes, that's right. Hand signals can help. Don't worry about repeating yourself. Body language interpreters, we're going to come back to interpreters. Yes, you can point to things like your name tag. I would say be careful with translation apps. Yes, there may be some privacy issues around that too. A picture board, yeah, that's a good one. Interpreters. Okay, you've asked family to provide written words from their language. Okay, some translating strategies happening in the chat here. Make sure that you face the patient while you're talking. That's a really good one. Okay, combination of verbal and nonverbal body language. Simple, short sentences. Yes, that's a very good one. Yeah. So speaking slowly, simple, short sentences, repetition, nonverbal communication strategies. I think you guys have picked out all of the main things that I wanted to touch on, so that's good. And the College of Nurses talks a little bit more about that as well. Now, I want to come back to the idea of translators. So yes, translators are a very good thing to have. Who should you be using as a translator? Yeah. Translators can be challenging sometimes. You should use someone neutral. A professional translator would be best, right? But they're not always available. Jake, that's interesting. So someone earlier suggested family members, and now you're saying anyone but family members. Oh, so who should we be using family members? Yeah, if there's someone that's a nurse that happens to speak the language, that would be wonderful. A coworker would be wonderful, yes. It depends on what you were talking about. Very good point. That's so true. So there are some challenges with using family members, and maybe even on a day-to-day basis, depending on the culture, there might be some challenges with using family members. And yes, in the real world, we do have to rely on family a lot. But when you're trying to talk to a client, the problem with a family member is that sometimes they interpret what the person is saying, and you don't get the whole picture of what the person's trying to say. So it's not as objective. Yeah. Yep. The CNO does talk about this as an ethical, which is one of the reasons why I'm pointing it out. That's right. So the family member might not tell the nurse everything the patient is saying. Yeah, and like, let's say a woman is being abused by her husband, for example, and you're using the husband as the interpreter, that could be a problem. Right, they might withhold information, they might add their opinion. So depending on the situation, it may not be appropriate to use a family member. Now, on a day-to-day basis, if you're asking, you know, a simple question or something and you're just in the room, maybe the family is all you have. That's better than nothing, obviously. But you just need to be really careful about using family members as interpreters. And the College of Nurses of Ontario, in their the Culturally Sensitive Care document on page 7, talks about that. And there's a whole chapter, chapter 6, in the textbook about the use of interpreters. All right, lots of great topics in these modules. So touch is another one of those things you need to be careful. How many, I don't know you guys very well, but how many of us walk into a room, or we see people who walk into a room and their initial reaction is to be like, oh, hello, Mrs. Smith, and like put their hand on the person and just start talking to them? How many of you guys have seen that? Yes, right? So here's what I would like you to do. Okay, this might be something that you can reflect on, is how about just to stop and think before you walk up and start putting your hands all over people. There are many different cultures in which touch is one of those things that is not okay to just be doing with strangers. So yes, unless you already know that client's response to touch, if you've already asked the person, it's not a good idea to touch people without their permission. Sitting on their beds, yeah, that's another big thing. We got to like teach people not to just sit on everybody's bed, right? So the best thing to do is ask people's permission. Yes, you should ask permission before you get into people's personal space. Touch is one of those really sensitive issues that we need to be aware of. So eye contact, gestures, expressions, especially touch, those types of things can be interpreted differently by different cultures. So it's a good idea to get to know a client first and to ask them before you put your hands on them. When you're doing care, in particular with certain cultures, it's important to ask. So my recommendation is before you start touching people, just ask everybody. You never know how people are feeling about touch, right? So it's just better to ask. Okay, eye contact is another one of those things. So eye contact is shaped by different culturally appropriate norms. There's an interesting article linked below this slide. It's not required reading for the course, but it does talk about eye contact and how it's shaped differently in some cultures. Just be mindful of the fact that in some cultures it's rude to be staring someone down, and so they might not respond as well to you staring at them, and just because they're not looking directly at you might not mean what you think that it means. You need to view that in terms of what their culture talks about in terms of eye contact. And individualism versus collectivism. We talk about that in this course. Individualist cultures are cultures in which the focus is given primarily to self and possibly immediate family members. So in terms of prioritizing, you know, where people put their time and their energy and what people value, it's usually in relation to that very, well, individualist approach. So it's the self, the immediate family, whereas collectivist cultures put the priority on the larger group's needs. So what's good for society. In those cultures, you're more likely to see things like publicly funded healthcare and things like that, where we're taking care of everybody else. So the focus is on the we instead of the I. That's two very broad ways to divide culture, but that's the way that it's been classified in the course. All right, so that is a very quick overview of modules 4 and 5. Are there any questions before I send you guys off for the next couple of weeks to get ready for the midterm? Okay, so for those of you that are watching the recording, thank you very much for sticking around. If you guys have questions, please post them in the live session discussion board. I'm going to stick around and ask, see if there's any more questions from the people that are live here. Thank you very much. Have a great